Hi everyone, and welcome to the last unit of the Survey of American Literature 1 and the second lecture on American realism and naturalism. As you've probably noticed throughout this course, to give you a sense of a particular period that we covered in this class, I selected certain authors and certain texts that are typical, that are representative of each period or style. This time I chose for you Theodore Dreiser and his novel Sister Carrie as a representative of American naturalism. But in today's lecture, I will not only tackle the historical meaning of Dreiser's novel and its naturalist elements, but will also discuss what that text means to us as contemporary readers. If you'd like to see what's the relationship between this novel and video games, paintball, and the Kardashians, stay tuned. One of the main representatives of American naturalism, Theodore Dreiser, was born in Terre Haute, Indiana, as the ninth of 10 surviving children. He was born to a family of immigrants. His father came from Germany, and his mother was from the Moravia region of today's Czech Republic. His father had owned a wool mill before it burned to the ground, and after that, the family sank into poverty. They started moving from one small Indiana town to another, trying to make ends meet. Dreiser's impoverished childhood and his immigrant upbringing strongly influenced his writing and the choice of his topics. He wrote about immigrants and poor working-class characters. He also wrote about fallen women, for which he again took inspiration from his personal life. Dreiser had 5 older sisters. Almost all of them had a reputation as loose women, and 2 of them, Mame and Sylvia, bore an illegitimate child, which was very scandalous at the time. At the age of 16, Dreiser moved to Chicago to escape his family's poverty. Like the heroine of his first novel, Sister Carrie, he went to Chicago in search of success. Even though he hadn't received much of an education, some biographers even say that he was barely literate at the time. In Chicago, Dreiser started a writing career as a newspaper reporter. It didn't matter that his articles were hastily worked up, full of errors and miserably written, because he was making a living. He later married a school teacher, Sarah White, which was a very smart move because he got someone who would edit and rewrite his texts. Later, Dreiser also became editor of several famous magazines issued by Buttrick Publications. And then, one day, Dreiser's friend, Arthur Henry, suggested to Dreiser that he should write a novel. So, based on the life of his own sister, Emma, who had run off from Chicago to Canada and then to New York with a married man, Dreiser wrote his first novel, Sister Carrie, the topic of our lecture. In spite of the fact that it was written in 1900, Sister Carrie still makes an interesting read, even 120 years after its publication. And one of the reasons for that is that it deals with cultural phenomena that not only still exist, but are even more obvious in the 21st century. And Dreiser very skillfully juggles those different cultural voices, cultural languages, pits them against each other and exposes their correlation. So let's take a look at those different cultural languages that he included in his novel. The language of naturalism, that of sentimentality, and consumerism. In many ways, Sister Carrie is a typical naturalist novel. As a typical realist and naturalist, Dreiser is a true social commentator, social historian, who depicts the social and cultural reality of late 19th century American society. His novel is set in two largest American cities at the end of the 19th century, New York, which had become a metaphor for American industrial expansion, development of trade and money industry, and Chicago, the second largest city at the time. In line with naturalist principles, Dreiser's heroine, Carrie, is a lower-class character. She is a poor provincial girl, one of the millions of immigrants who poured in Chicago and New York looking for a better life. In that sense, she is also a type, a typical immigrant and an outsider. At first, Carrie seems to be fully determined by forces over which she has no control. She must struggle for survival in the merciless urban jungle. As she loses her first job at the shoe factory, as a typical naturalist character, she is at the mercy of the circumstances and outside forces. Yet, and note this because there is an important catch here, the series of bad circumstances in which Carrie finds herself do not result in her failure and progressive deterioration. On the contrary, we learn that her trajectory is not a typical naturalist story of decline, but a story of social success. In its own time, this novel was scandalous, precisely because of that. Carrie actually rises while becoming a fallen woman. She resolves her financial difficulties by getting involved in a relationship first with Drouet and then with Hurstwood in exchange for material benefits. So we could say that she's the 19th century version of a gold digger. And that the fact that Dreiser did not punish his heroine's immorality was the most controversial part of the book at the time it was published. In 19th century literature, sexuality outside marriage was considered criminal behavior. Fallen women like Flaubert's Madame Bovary could only be tragic figures. They had to be punished for their transgression and immorality. Carrie, however, lives out of wedlock with two sugar daddies. She's also not an honest person. We learn that she lies to her sister as well as to both Drouet and Hurstwood. And she also walks out on Hurstwood when he needs her the most. And yet she succeeds. She rises by falling. And that is something completely different from what 19th century audience was used to. They were used to sentimental novels and sentimental plots in which virtue had to be rewarded and vice and immorality had to be punished. When Mrs. Doubleday, the wife of the publisher, read the manuscript of Sister Carrie, she tried her best to prevent its publication. She did not succeed, though, because the contract had already been signed, but Frank Doubleday refused to market the text properly. So the novel sold less than 500 copies, and this commercial failure drove Dreiser into severe depression. He was on the verge of suicide because of such a poor reception of his first novel. But the novel's failure to meet the standards of sentimental fiction, to comply with the sentimental conventions of its time, by not punishing its heroine for her violation of Victorian moral values, can also be seen as a subversion of the naturalist conventions. According to the naturalist principle, human beings are like puppets, profoundly determined by circumstances, by the forces of heredity and environment they are not capable of resisting and over which they have no control. And the situation Carrie is in, right before she meets Drouet for the second time, definitely points to that. At that point, she is heading towards decline. But then, lo, comes Drouet, who offers her some money, and bam! This not only prevents her decline, but her story becomes a story of social success.
Oh, hello! Hello, Sally! You do? Where you been keeping yourself?
Out at my sister's.
Is that a fact? You know, I've been thinking a lot about you, Sally, but I've been busier here than a scalded dog.
My name's Carrie. Carrie Meeber.
Well, of course, Carrie. Just wanted to see if you knew.
Mr. Drouet,
No, Charlie's the name, charm's the game. What's up?
would there be work here in your company?
For you?
Yes, I lost my job this morning.
Oh, no. They don't hire girls.
I've been all over the city. I just can't find anything.
Hey, you look pretty whipped, Carrie. This is not the girl that I saw in that train.
I've been working in a shoe factory. I got my finger caught in a machine this morning.
You did?
I just don't know what to do.
Carrie, that's no work for you. Does it hurt?
Not very much.
Let me see it. Come on, give me your hand. I want to give you something. Here's $10.
Oh, no.
Take it. Buy yourself something nice to wear. You look for a job like that, they'll hand you a broom.
I could never pay it back.
Not if you don't take it, you can't.
I'll take half of it.
No, never take half of anything. Now, look, this'll see you through till you get a job again. Now, listen to me. I got some things to finish up here before we close. I want you to go home, wash your face. You got something else to wear, haven't you?
Yes.
Well, put it on. You and I will see Chicago tonight, huh? Have you been to Fitzgerald's? No, of course not. I'm going to buy you the best meal in town. Now, you meet me there at 7 o'clock. Fitzgerald's. It's on Adams. Everybody knows it. Take a hat. 7 o'clock.
One might argue that this too is in line with the naturalist philosophy, because by taking the money, Carrie manifests the animalistic instinct for self-preservation. In that sense, taking Drouet's money is nothing but a survival strategy, the only way she can flee poverty and the impending catastrophe. And this interpretation supports the naturalist belief that morality and all other values become meaningless in the face of the brutal law of social success and failure. Yet there is one more cultural voice, one more language at play here, and that is the language of consumerism, of the new consumer culture that appeared in 19th century America and was being fueled by the huge economic growth and the urbanization of the country. For Carrie, Drouet is a symbol of the life she wants. He's a vehicle to fulfilling her material desires and her wish to escape the lower class. From the first page of the novel, we learn that Carrie is full of desire. When she first meets Drouet on the train, she's attracted by him because of his fine clothes, because he introduces himself as a businessman and claims to know all the interesting places in Chicago, its theaters, fancy restaurants, and shops.
Allow me to introduce myself. It's pronounced Drouet. My father was French. Charles S. Drouet. S for smiles, Charlie to his friends. That's engraved. Oh, that's nothing. Forget it. No. Rub your thumb over that. Go ahead. Huh? Oh, keep it. I got plenty of them.
Right from the beginning of her Chicago episode, as she lives in her sister's cramped, ugly apartment and tries to make a living in the shoe factory, Carrie realizes that Chicago offers two completely different realities. The anonymous reality, the cruel world of hardships and poverty, and the public reality, the world of elegantly dressed people who fill the crowded streets during rush hour, the world in which women spend money like water. And she knows that she wants to be part of that other world. She wants to be dressed like those fine ladies. She doesn't want to spend her life working in a shoe factory. And it is precisely that dissatisfaction with her lot, which is fueled by her consumer desire, that alters the course of her trajectory, that powers her social ascent, and saves her from the plot of decline. The consumer language thus functions as an apology for the heroine's behavior, for her violation of the moral norm. This is how Dreiser explains that. Not evil, but longing for that which is better, more often directs the steps of the erring. The dominance of the consumer language in the novel is also visible from the way Drouet seduces Carrie. When he woos her, he doesn't tell her things like, Carrie, you're the most beautiful woman in the world, and stuff like that. He doesn't use any common romantic phrases, but he speaks in monetary terms. He says, quote, now I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go over here to Partridge's and you pick out what you want. Then we'll go to the show tonight. He offers to take her shopping for clothes, and then he promises to take her to a fancy restaurant and to the theater to see a popular show. Drouet is sort of a Stone Age type. No real romance there, just pure naturalism. He takes advantage of Carrie's hopeless situation and bargains, determined to get what he wants.
Why don't you try to be a sensible girl, Carrie? Stop worrying. Put the money away. Just a loan from a friend. I'm not going to give it another thought. Buy yourself a little coat. You need a coat, don't you? Well, there you are. Pay me back when you get a job. Anything wrong with that? You better put that money away before the waiter picks it up. Look out! That's settled.
You've been awfully nice, Mr. Drouet.
Oh, why not? Everybody gets a little help from somebody. Hey, look around you. Some of the finest ladies in Chicago right here. Where do you think they get everything from? From their husbands. Or friends.
And by making Carrie accept Drouet's offer, Dreiser makes the consumer language, her consumer desire, the dominant force in the novel that obscures Carrie's moral conscience and all other voices that speak to her. And this interpretation of the consumer language as a powerful external force pretty much works in tandem with the naturalist view of the world. Remember the opposition determinism versus free will. If, as the naturalists believed, we are determined by forces that dominate us, how can we speak of free will? In this sense, the naturalist philosophy is completely incompatible with the sentimental language of Puritan morality. How can we speak of morality if we have no free will? If forces rather than free will determine our actions, how can we speak of evil? So the ultimate interpretation of Carrie's behavior depends on what the readers believe in. If we believe in one's free will and responsibility, then Carrie is guilty, and we should condemn her. But if we see life as ultimately beyond personal control, the way the naturalists did, then she's innocent. Naturalist elements are the most obvious in the characterization of George Hurstwood, a wealthy manager of a saloon who leaves his upper middle class life and runs off with Carrie to New York, and then sinks to ruin while Carrie rises to be a theatrical star. And Hurstwood's plot is a typical naturalist plot of decline. His downfall is mostly caused by forces and circumstances over which he has no control, like his sexual drives, the fact that his animal desire, his infatuation with Carrie drove him to fatal decisions. Then also chance and outside factors. The turning point in his plot, in his life, is the episode when he steals the money from the safe. He is slightly intoxicated when he finds the safe open. He takes $10,000 from the safe and debates taking the money, but then decides against it. Yet at the very moment when he is about to return the money to the safe accidentally closes and locks, leaving him with the money in his hands. He's unable to return the money, so he takes the cash, which eventually leads to his downfall. The naturalistic elements in Hurstwood's characterization are also seen in his inability to recreate his identity and adapt to the new circumstances once he and Carrie have settled in New York City. Seized by strong feelings of remorse because of the theft, he keeps berating himself for the mistake of taking the money and leaving the security of his former life. He was a very wealthy man back in Chicago, the manager of a saloon, Fitzgerald and Moy's, the class of the people just below the very rich. But in New York, he's nobody. He has to start from scratch. He has little capital to invest, and when his first business venture fails, he has nowhere to turn. He's forced to look for a job, to compete on the labor market, which turns out to be a complete disaster.
$1.80 each. Funny thing about head waiters, the things they won't pick up and the things they will.
Hey, Rockefeller. I want to talk to you.
Hey, George. For Mrs. Lawson.
You never told me you worked for Fitzgerald's in Chicago. Well, I'll have to let you go. I guess you know why.
In New York, Hurstwood's grief over his past is so strong that it prevents him from building a new life. There, he becomes extremely nostalgic, isolated, passive, and depressive.
I'm desperate, Carrie. I've got to get out of this. I've got to. If I could get $1,000, save anything to get out of this, to get a place of my own. If it was mine, I could build it up into something. Really, I would.
How can we save $1,000 out of what you make now?
Did it once, didn't I? I bought a house of my own. I raised children. I lived well. Nobody lived better than I did.
Stop talking about the past. What good is it? Let's take what comes, but let's not worry so.
Take this. Live like this.
He keeps grieving over his past life, which prevents him from moving on and starting anew. Or to use naturalist terms, Hurstwood's inability to remake himself in the new surroundings, his inability to adapt, obstructs his struggle for survival. And so, in a way, he himself contributes to his own destruction at each step along the way.
o'clock, all out. Where you going with that plank? 7 o'clock, all out. 7 o'clock, all out. 7 o'clock, all out. 7 o'clock, all out.
I've only been out of the city hospital for 2 days. They told me I should rest up.
7 o'clock, all out. Seven o'clock, all out. 7 o'clock. All right, come on, you. Come on. Oh.
Dreiser's novel abounds in symbols, and one of those symbols is the theater, which symbolizes the public reality as well as the illusion it creates. Right from the start, Carrie is strongly attracted by the shiny world of the theater. The theater is one of the first public places she visits with Drouet, and she's fascinated by it, so much so that she later even takes on a role in the play Under the Gaslight. For Carrie, plays create an illusion of reality that is more beautiful, more interesting, and entertaining than everyday life. And this depiction of the theater very much resembles a phenomenon from our own culture, a phenomenon that the French postmodern critics Jean Baudrillard and Guy Debord and Italian author Umberto Eco have called hyper-reality. Those postmodern theorists claim that our world is marked by the dominance of appearance, dominance of representation over reality. There are countless examples of the hyperreal all around us. Take, for instance, advertising. If you take a closer look at this advertisement, you can notice that the cherry on top of the cupcake has either been photoshopped to make it look better than what cherries look in real life, or it may not even be the real thing at all, but fake fruit that looks much more colorful, much more appealing and tastier than ordinary cherries. In advertising, it is very common to see digitally altered images perfected in order to be aesthetically more pleasing than the real thing, designed to appeal to the consumers. And for Baudrillard, this usage of the hyperreal in advertising is the driving force behind the consumer society. Many of the images we see in advertisements are a mixture of the reality and illusion. No one has hair that's shiny, but still many people fall for it and buy those products whose advertisements are aesthetically more appealing than the others. Baudrillard uses the term simulation when he describes this phenomenon of the hyperreal in the contemporary world. According to Baudrillard, simulation is the reduplication of reality by signs, a generation of the hyperreal. The hyperreal is a setting or a situation that is lifelike. It is something fictitious, masquerading as something authentic. Combat simulations, such as paintball, are a good example of the hyperreal setting. Paintball imitates a battle. It's a sort of a reenactment of the real thing, but the player's life is not at stake. They cannot be killed or seriously injured. Theme parks or video games are another form of the hyperreal or simulation. They offer you the illusion of becoming part of something that is more interesting, more entertaining than your everyday life. And you can play roles that in reality you could never play. You can play one of the role-playing video games and become someone else. Give yourself a completely new identity and be whatever you want to be. You can pick your race and decide whether you will be human, dwarf, or someone else. You can also pick your class and become warrior, hunter, mage, or warlock, and become a hero in this hyper-real world, saving the lives of millions from enemies that could destroy the world. And like paintball, those role-playing games may give you infinite lives, which gives you more freedom and makes this simulated reality both safer and more exciting than the real world, as you can engage in risky behavior and be much more reckless in your fights than in real life. When you go to a theme park, such as Disneyland, you again enter a simulated environment that creates the illusion of reality, a simulated reality, a sort of a temporary escape from your own life and your own social roles. According to Jean Baudrillard, for its visitors, Disneyland serves as a world where dreams can become reality. And by indulging themselves in this imaginary world, they can escape the realities of the real world by taking, for example, a ride on a steamboat and pretending to be living in the time of Mark Twain. And this imaginary world, this hyper-real world, according to Baudrillard, is always more appealing, more realistic than reality itself. One of the best examples of American hyper-real environment is Las Vegas. This town is really a visual textbook of Baudrillard's and Eco's theories. When I visited Las Vegas back in 2004, I had already been familiar with those theories of the hyperreal, and I remember that I was nevertheless very much surprised by the amount of fake stuff I saw there. Almost every larger hotel in Las Vegas is a themed environment, simulating one famous world tourist destination, like Paris, Rome, Venice, etc. This hotel is called Luxor, and it simulates the great pyramids of Giza in Egypt. There is a Sphinx replica right at the entrance, and then when you enter the hotel, you realize that it is actually a casino whose interior is completely incongruous with what it represents from the outside. There are dozens of slot machines there with people sitting completely oblivious of their surroundings. Nobody pays attention to anything else besides their slot machine. There is no conversation, no interaction between people whatsoever. The only thing you can hear occasionally is the sound of coins hitting a bucket, which is a slot machine payout. And there, in the midst of all those machines and alienated people in complete discordance with everything else in that space, there is this simulation of ancient Egyptian heritage. Sarcophagi and replicas of ancient sculptures standing right beside the slot machines and the contemporary stuff. And the effect of this conflation of the casino decor and fake Egyptian stuff is really bizarre. Another thing that struck me in those hotels' interiors is that reminded me of Baudrillard's theory, is how all of them create a kind of transcendence from time and space. All of those hotels have ceilings, artificial ceilings, that create the illusion that it is always daytime. Some of them look like a perpetual sunset. And this disorients you right away. You lose your sense of time. You forget that it is perhaps night outside in the real world. And also your sense of space is distorted because you seem to be in an interior that is a simulation of a different of a different space, different place. This is the Venice Hotel, and it is not only a very good replica of the real Venice, but it is also, in a sense, more beautiful than the original. There are no filthy canals like in real Venice. Everything is perfectly clean and appealing. The gondolier is even singing Santa Lucia in Italian, so you kind of get lost and forget that you are actually in the United States, not in Italy. In other words, you are in two places at once, unable to make a difference between the reality and the illusion. Las Vegas is the second most popular American tourist destination, right after Florida. I had always believed that Las Vegas is a place frequented by rich people, and was quite surprised to see how popular it is among ordinary Americans, even among the elderly people. For many of them, a week in Las Vegas is a favorite holiday destination, and they eagerly spend their yearly savings to go there and pretend to be in Paris, Italy, or Egypt, the destinations they cannot afford to visit, and plus they can do some gambling along the way. Social networking sites are also a good example of what Baudrillard calls the hyperreal. We can create a simulation of ourselves on the computer screen using social networking sites, a kind of an imaginary identity for ourselves. We can also be connected not only to our real friends, but also to the virtual ones, famous people, celebrities whom we would never befriend in real life, etc. If anyone is interested in this topic of simulation and hyperreality in social media, I will add one final extra credit assignment on your Moodle page that is related to that. But let's go back to Sister Carrie now. Simulation is very much present in Dreiser's novel, and almost every character at one point or another is engaged in creating a simulation of themselves. In particular, it is our protagonist Carrie who demonstrates extraordinary capacity to adapt to new circumstances. And Dreiser explains her adaptability in terms of both the consumerist and the naturalist motivation. The theorist of the leisure class, Thorstein Veblen, tried to explain the psychology of consumer desire, and he claimed that before experiencing desire, an individual first compares himself or herself to the others, whom he sees as economically or culturally superior. You probably know the phrase keeping up with the Joneses. When your wealthy neighbors, the Joneses, engage in conspicuous consumption, showing off their wealth and social status, you suddenly want to have the same things they have. And at the root of this comparison, which plays a key role in creating our consumer desire, is envy. You start envying your neighbors for their modern house with a large pool, for their expensive car, etc. And then you start desiring those very objects. But note, envy is also one of the human drives. So in this sense, the psychology of desire and consumption is in line with the naturalist theory of biological determinism. According to Baudrillard, consumption is foremost based on desire, not necessarily on one's needs. And the consumer society operates and sustains itself in that it dominates us by perpetually driving us to new desires, creating an endless circle. Excuse me. According to Baudrillard, pleasure is not the ultimate goal of consumption, but rather a rationalization for consumption. The real goal of the consumer culture is endless desire. The psychology of desire is also one of the central themes in Dreiser's novel. It is most obvious through the symbolism of clothes, the hallmark of the growing consumer culture. All turning points in Carrie's life are related to her need or her desire for new clothes. As a result, for example, of her inability to buy herself the winter clothes, she gets ill and loses her first job. When she wanders through Chicago searching for a new job, powerless against her fatal situation, she sees the finely dressed ladies and is full of envy and desire. And this is a kind of foreshadowing of what is about to come. Soon she meets Drouet, the guy from the train, who offers to buy her new shoes and a jacket. And it is precisely her desire for better clothes that makes her turn her back on moral scruples. She takes the money from Drouet and becomes his mistress. Later on in New York, Carrie's desire for better clothes will prompt her to leave Hurstwood. Faced with the superior appearance of women she sees at the matinee on Broadway and later in the theater, she starts wishing, quote, more and more that Hurstwood was not in the way, unquote. Having left Hurstwood, Carrie starts, quote, buying for herself as recklessly as she dared, regardless of the consequences, and invests most of her spare money in clothes, unquote.
If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits? Putting on the Ritz. Different types who wear a day coat, pants with stripes and cutaway coat, perfect fits. Putting on the Ritz. Dressed up like $1 million trooper, trying hard to look like Gary Cooper. Come, let's mix where Rockefellers walk with sticks or umbrellas in their midst. Putting on the Ritz. Have you seen the well-to-do up and down Park Avenue on that famous thoroughfare with their noses in the air? High hats and arrow collars, white spats and lots of dollars, spending every dime for a wonderful time. If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits? Putting on the Ritz. Different types who wear a day coat, pants with stripes and cutaway coat, perfect fits. Putting on the Ritz.
In Veblen's terms, Carrie constantly measures her personal worth by comparing herself to those who are better off. And she tries to emulate, to look like the glamorous ladies she sees on Broadway. So her acquiring more elegant clothes both fuels and demonstrates her social ascent. Besides, the material objects she acquires change her sense of self. They offer her a possibility of self-transformation. Her endless desires prompt her to reconstruct herself over and over. Acquiring better and better clothes, she becomes prettier, more cultivated, more attractive. In other words, by pursuing her desire, Carrie not only acquires a new identity and social mobility, but also becomes more desirable to others. She becomes a famous actress, and thus she herself also becomes an object of desire. And she basically improves her social identity and fulfills her social ambitions by imitating or by simulating, to use Baudrillard's term. Carrie is a master imitator of her surroundings. When she sees people whom she finds superior, she immediately starts imitating their manners. By improving her looks and her manners, she's able to get a job as a chorus girl in the theater. So her ability to imitate and remodel herself helps her to both survive overcome the adverse circumstances, and satisfy her craving for better forms of life. In this sense, the language of simulation is also compatible with the naturalistic discourse. Remember Darwin's theory. The ability to simulate and create deceptive appearances is an imperative to the survival in the animal world. Likewise, in Dreiser's novel Imitation and Simulation, or The Creation of Deceptive Appearances, equals adaptability. Now, I have here a few examples from the popular culture of two women whose careers were pretty similar to that of Dreiser's heroine. This is Norma Jean, the lady that will later become known as Marilyn Monroe. In these two pictures, Norma Jean looks pretty normal and natural, your typical girl next door. But then, a few years later, she completely transformed her appearance. She dyed her hair platinum blonde, underwent some facial surgery, and started dressing provocatively, using heavy makeup, etc. And bam, she suddenly became a famous actress, tremendously popular throughout the world. She turned herself into a glamorous vamp, which helped her conquer the Hollywood market. In naturalist terms, she actually engaged in mimicry, creating deceptive appearances in order to succeed, to survive on the celebrity market. Another popular example of mimicry and self-transformation is Madonna. She may not be that popular today the way she used to be, but she's still in the game. I remember I was 13 when she started her career and became world famous back in 1983 with her hit Like a Virgin. And she has worked so hard with each new album to maintain her fame and her audience's interest in herself. And she has done that but by constantly changing her looks, by simulating endless versions of herself, by transforming herself. Let's take a look at the self-transformation she has undergone over the years. Carrie, too, engages in mimicry all the time. By embracing new identities throughout the novel, she exhibits a remarkable adaptability to new circumstances.
Oh, every day.
All right, mediums only. I said mediums. All right, now you walk right across the stage, heads up. You stop in the center so Mr. Goodman can get a look at. No grandmothers. We need dancers here. I think. All right, go ahead. You flash a smile out front and form a line.
Now you. Any experience?
Yes, I've been in several plays in Chicago.
What did you play?
Camille.
What's your name?
Carrie Medenda.
All right, Camille.
This fills it, Mr. Goodman. I'll keep a couple of the pretty ones hanging around. Some of these might be flat-footed.
All right. Now, the rehearsal call is for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Be on time. You've got to be on time every morning for the next 4 weeks. Can you do that?
Oh, yes.
Good. The show opens Monday, November 4th in this theater. Good luck. Thank you all.
Oh, thank you.
Hurstwood, however, unlike Carrie, is unable to adapt once they settle in New York. Even though he was a very clever simulator back in Chicago, he deceived almost everyone, including his employer, his wife, Drouet, as well as Carrie.
It was just another lie.
Yes, it was. I have to tell you something before you walk out of my life, and this was the only way I could think of to do it. I lied to you about my wife, my family, and my intentions. I did it because I knew you'd never see me again if you knew the truth.
I never will.
You think I lied to you because I held you cheap. That's wrong. I couldn't risk losing you.
Yet, once he has lost his position at Fitzgerald and Moyes, Hurstwood is unable to keep on simulating, which leads to his New York debacle and his downfall. Once he stops keeping up appearances, his life takes a bad turn. He loses his power and his public position. In other words, his lack of simulation marks his weakness, and it directly corresponds to his plot of decline.
You.
That's all.
Young man.
Could I buy that from you?
For how much?
Would a 10-cent profit interest you?
Oh, I've been waiting in there all morning. These things are hard to get nowadays.
Yes, I know. But I need a day's work very badly. I have a wife with a child coming. It's a sad story. We'll keep it strictly commercial. Would you take 50 cents for it?
Yeah, I'll take 50.
In Sister Carrie, it is also the media that signify the dominance of representation over reality. Carrie, for instance, gets promoted to a leading actress once an article about her appears in the newspapers. Dreiser also tells us that she gets promoted because of her good looks, not because of her great acting abilities. She acts the silent little Quakeress, the role that consists only of frowning. But one of the newspapers describes her as, quote, one of the cleverest members of the chorus, unquote. In other words, she becomes famous for nothing but her good looks, and the rest is simulation. So the media, too, are creators of simulation, and so is the theater. Each time Carrie acts on stage, she not only engages in simulation, but also incites others to desire. Dreiser tells us that the audience saw power where it was not. We learn that, in fact, Carrie's stage appearance is nothing but deceptive appearance. On stage, she is a sexual object of man's desire, whereas in reality, she is an asexual person who never experiences passion with either Drouet or Hurstwood, which proves Baudrillard's theory that simulation is a generation of the real that is not based in reality, but in fact masks the absence of the real.
Now, Miss Medenda, is there anything you could tell me that's a little bit more colorful? Our Sunday readers like personal touches. We've got all adult stuff. 2 seasons in New York, 1 year on the road.
That's right.
Anything like your favorite food, fights with the director, romantic interests?
I can't think of any.
As an icon, part of many men's dreams and women's ideals, Carrie's character perfectly parallels the mechanics of contemporary celebrity culture and the power of contemporary advertising to turn a thing into a sign. It is our media-dominated world that has contributed to the rise of the celebrity cult, but also to turning celebrities into brand name products. And that is a very interesting cultural phenomenon. Marilyn Monroe is a good example. How did a woman who died at 36, who starred in just a handful of movies, become such an epic commodity? Even today, 60 years after her death, Marilyn Monroe is still a global enterprise. She has become an American archetype. Her image has been reproduced on countless commercial products, but also in serious art, like Andy Warhol's silk screens. More than 300 documentaries have been made about her. And I'm sure that most of you have heard of Marilyn Monroe, even though you might not have seen any of her movies. And the celebrity phenomenon is something that draws upon both the notion of consumerism and the notion of desire. Like in Dreiser's Sister Carrie, in our contemporary world, celebrity equals commodity. Another aspect of the celebrity cult and the loss of the real is the fact that often one's fame serves as a camouflage for corruption, an excuse that mitigates public scrutiny. This is Princess Diana. She was the first wife of Prince Charles and mother of Princes William and Harry. Sorry for using a dated example. I know that Diana died before you were even born, but she's a very good example for how fame can mitigate public scrutiny. Diana was beloved by the media. Her wedding ceremony was broadcast all over the world, and her marriage to Charles was painted by the media as a perfect fairy tale. The media turned Diana into a simulation, an icon of the hyperreal. Even years after her death, the media continued to present Diana as a saint-like woman, the apostle of the human rights, a fairy tale princess, an ideal of humanity who was almost like a saint. And this despite the fact that she was really not that ideal, as she committed adultery, craved for wealth and extravagance, and was described as a narcissist by people who knew her. But in her worship of Diana, the media also exploited her. In one of the interviews, she herself admitted that she saw herself as a simulation, as, quote, a good product that sits on a shelf and sells well, unquote. But there is another example, another celebrity you might be more familiar with. I really must admit that I don't follow celebrities, royal weddings, and similar stuff. And in particular, I know almost nothing about the Kardashians. It was one of my students from a few years ago who suggested that the Kardashians might be a good example for this lecture. So I made a very brief and superficial research when preparing for this video to see what makes this family so famous, and I learned that the most popular Kardashian is Kim Kardashian, and that she became popular by creating a very successful simulation of herself and then turning that simulation into a brand. According to one source, she earned $45.5 million in 2016 from a brand she built on self-aggrandizement, shameless product peddling, and nude selfies. This is a quote from this source. And she also reportedly made a sex tape, which actually made her famous. And that might be yet another example of how fame can serve as a camouflage for corruption. But since my understanding of this topic is really very limited, I will not include this final example from the popular culture into my argument on Dreiser's novel. Though, if anyone would like to prepare an extra credit report on how the Kardashian phenomenon fits Baudrillard's theory of the hyperreal and how it might correspond to the heroine of our novel, you are more than welcome. So I will add this topic to your additional assignments as well. But let's see now how our heroine's fame compensates for her wrongdoings. When she visits Carrie, having read about her reputation, Mrs. Vance addresses her with, quote, "Why, you little sinner," unquote. Still, she phones on her to the extent that she even pretends not to know about Hurstwood's downfall and the fact that Carrie abandoned him. Drouet, too, visits Carrie once she becomes famous, and he treats her like an old friend and doesn't mention a single word about the fact that she left him for Hurstwood. On the contrary, he even brags about knowing her in front of his friends because she's famous now.
Miss Medenda, there's a gentleman to see you from Chicago.
Curtain in 5 minutes. Is it you? It is? Oh, Charlie's a name.
Charms again.
Thanks, Miss Medenda. I guess I can get a story out of this. Look for it in the Sunday Globe.
Thank you, Mr. Callan.
Not a scar?
No?
Oh, what a long, long way. You look lovely. You're successful. You're taller, prettier, younger, happier.
Sit down, Charlie.
As for me, I eat 5 meals a day, have 150 neckties, ride in a parlor car, and you're the greatest thing I've seen since a Flatiron Building. How are you?
As a celebrity, an icon, Carrie again reveals the power of representation to obscure everything, even traditional morality. And in this sense, the answer to the question how Dreiser excused his heroine for rising by falling lies paradoxically in the question itself, by making her rise. So the media play an important role in turning Carrie into a brand and creating a simulation, something divorced from her true self. But the media also play an important role in Hurstwood's decline. Whereas for Carrie, the newspapers offer a new public self. For Hurstwood, they become a barrier between the anonymous and public reality. After his New York economic and social disaster, he gives up on his own experiences in favor of the newspaper facts. Instead of looking for a job, he spends most of his days sitting in the rocking chair, reading newspapers, and Dreiser reveals that, quote, his difficulties vanished in the items he so well loved to read, unquote. Newspaper facts also change Hurstwood's perception of reality. Although they deal with the real events, the articles that he reads represent a twisted picture of the outside world. Hurstwood's recognition of the false reality produced by the newspapers occurs when he applies for a vacant position during the streetcar strike, convinced that the strikers are powerless against the companies, as he concluded from what he had read. However, this adventure turns out to be a complete fiasco since he is beaten by numerous strikers. Hurstwood's failure is a direct consequence of incompatibility of the outside reality and that created for him by the media. When he is warned about the strikers' revenge, he repeats the media cliché, quote, anyone who wants to run a car will be protected, unquote. Thus, the newspaper reality turns out to be a simulation too, since like the theater, it gives us something more pleasing than the reality itself. And just note the irony here. This exposure of the newspaper industry's role in the loss of the real is coming from an insider, a journalist and editor of popular magazines who worked in that industry. The industry that is supposed to be dealing with facts and reality, and that is really telling. After this strike-breaking episode, Hurstwood completely withdraws. He keeps reading his newspapers, keeps reading about other people and outside events, refusing to leave his home. And in that way, like most of today's celebrity fans, he prefers other people's reality to his own. I hope that this reading of Sister Carrie will help you see how Dreiser's novel can be read through the contemporary lens. I spent a long time studying Sister Carrie as I wrote my MA thesis, and that made me realize how accurate Dreiser's big city novel was, not only in describing some processes and phenomena that emerged in late 19th century American society, but also how by detecting those social processes and describing them as a real social historian of his time, as a real realist and naturalist author, Dreiser also anticipated many features of our own culture, the dominance of representation and the loss of the real. The cultural and sociological phenomena which he noted and criticized have come into full swing in our own time. Today, Sister Carrie is undoubtedly not as provocative as it was 100 years ago, but it is still interesting and meaningful, as it not only conveys the realities of turn of the 20th century American society, but also challenges our concept of ourselves and our own world, which is no less deterministic and certainly no less contradictory and prone to illusions than it was in Dreiser's time. To learn more about the symbolism in Dreiser's novel and its main themes, please click on the two links on your Moodle page below this video. The first one is a chapter from the textbook Vrijeme buđenja, and the other one is a revised and expanded version of that chapter, the article American Naturalism Revisited. Also, in the exam guidelines section, you can find the summary of this lecture and some more interpretation guidelines. Make sure to check out those additional materials because not everything has been included in this video. This was the last of the 9 video lectures in the COVID-19 edition of the Survey of American Literature 1. Thank you for watching and good luck with completing the course.